I'm Mike.
I'm Jason.
This is Snake Envy. We are thrilled to be joined by Garrett Hartle of OUT Reptiles. He's in Utah this weekend, so we appreciate him coming by. For those who don't know, you are a pioneer in a particular area of the python world. Tell everybody about that a little bit, for those who don't know.
Yeah, well, my thing was I really love reticulated pythons, and I think everybody should love reticulated pythons. But for obvious reasons, not everybody should have a reticulated python. So there's naturally occurring island localities that stay a lot smaller. We call them dwarf and super dwarf reticulated pythons, but it's not a genetic. It's not like dwarfism that you would breed in like some kind of dogs or even humans have. It's insular dwarfism, which is pretty cool. Yeah. So yeah, that's what we do.
Similar to the Central American boas. We're just
it's exactly
the geography
like
and the
or like a hog island boa.
Hog
they stay
island,
real small.
island species always tend to be a little smaller than the mainlands.
Yeah.
Very cool. Now the downside to that, I'm sure. How many years have you been working with those now?
I don't know.
20 plus. Yeah. So I'm guessing through selective breeding, you can predict the size fairly well, but in theory, there could always be an outlier.
Yeah, well, yes and no. I think after selectively breeding for enough generations, you know what this particular bloodline is going to give you. There are definite best practices. For example, we've found that using small females produces the smallest offspring, as opposed to like a little tiny male and a giant female. Okay. So even though we track it by percentages, like it's half super dwarf, 50% super dwarf, 75, those numbers aren't actually as important as the breeder actually caring about making them small. Okay. Because there's ways to, make them really small. Like you mentioned the ones at Clint's, you're like, oh, they're probably not fully grown. And I was telling Clint, like, you got to breed this female. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
she's fat and ready. She's huge. So, so you if you're buying them from anybody and everybody and you're going by the percentages, no, you're not going to have really any idea just on what the snake is listed at, what size it's going to get.
But 25 years in,
if you get them from a breeder that's familiar with their bloodline, they've been working on it for a while, you know exactly what you're going to get.
You've got it dialed in pretty well.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of Clint real quick, you're here for Clint's Reptile Room's 5th anniversary.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I'm excited.
It is a big deal, but this is the night prior to all the festivities beginning, and Clint always puts you guys through your paces. There's always some competitions. We got a couple guys that are coming by.
Way too hard.
They're coming by on Sunday, so they may want to do some bragging after the fact. Do you want to make any predictions?
Oh, they won't have anything
about
to brag
how well
about.
You're gonna. Okay, so there we go.
I saw the trophy. It's
Talk
like
a little
heavy.
smack.
It's like a 5-pound pewter trophy or something.
Wow.
I got to take that home.
You've got some motivation to have that on the plane with you going back.
Exactly.
Okay, so you're from Pennsylvania, correct?
Yes.
All right. We talk about it a lot in our circle, and we love to ask guys, how did you get into the reptile hobby? You mentioned to us earlier that you grew up in Southern California and you were herping. So I think we're a little older than you, but was your introduction to the reptile world through Wildcats?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my folks weren't into it. I didn't grow up with anyone. We were always the weird one. Probably a pretty similar story.
Yes.
My mom tells me a story when I was 2 out in Pennsylvania. I caught like a water snake, and as a 2-year-old does, I caught it midsection. I was like squeezing the dickens out of it. Yeah, and it's biting me, and I'm saying, "Look, Mom, ow! Isn't it pretty? Ow! Can I keep it? Ow!"
They are biters.
Especially when you squeeze them like that. Yeah. So just herping and finding stuff, catching things in the backyard, hiding them from her as long as I could, trying to breed in between.
My parents,
cardboard boxes under the bed.
Don't know everything I had in the house.
Oh yeah, that was bad.
So that's cool. The other thing that's been fascinating for me, listening to the two of you geek out about all these morphs and about all the breeding.
Yeah, we have a fun episode.
There is some similarities. Yeah, check that out on Garrett's channel. But there's actually some similarities in terms of breeding and morphs and genetics between these Pituophis and the retic world.
I mean, I would say probably any species, but I think the Pituophis are closer to superdwarf retics in a lot of ways.
Yeah, the way you explained some of these morphs and these
like the way the reds and yellows layer on them is very different from, say, like a tricolored king or something like that. So yeah, there's quite a few similarities. Also, they're kind of that like snake that's got a little oomph. It's kind of exciting to have, which is a super dwarf retic for sure. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, similarities
They're
personality wise too.
The husbandry is very different, though. So in the python world, warmer, more humid. These guys like things cooler, drier. Does that carry over when you're breeding, incubating? Do you incubate at maybe higher temperatures than the pits?
Well, we can go over that. So actually, the interesting thing with the super dwarfs, I think they come from more extremes. So it's almost like having altitude. So they do hots, but they do colds too. So overall, I keep my super dwarfs several degrees cooler than a mainland guy would. So we typically incubate around 87 degrees for the eggs, which what do you guys like, maybe 80-ish? Yeah. So I can't cook them at 80. They won't make it.
They don't.
But yeah, 87 is cooler. Most python guys do closer to 90. And I've done all the way down to 84. And 85, you actually still get pretty good success.
Really?
In the enclosures, though, like low 70s for the general temperature.
Right.
And then a hot spot of just over 80, 80 to 85 or something like that.
Oh, okay. That's
I
cooler
really
than I
like
would
that.
have expected.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I have a green tree python, and it's, about a 20-degree range in the totality of his enclosure, but it kind of starts up around 90 and then works its way down to...
They're very different, too. They're much more sensitive than a retic would be. And as far as dry, like you guys are using shredded aspen, that's what we use on a lot of the babies and stuff like that. So we actually do keep them dry until it's time for them to shed. Now in Pittsburgh, we have a lot of relative humidity anyways. So, but they thrive at like 60% humidity or something like that, so it's not too crazy.
Do you add any moisture boxes like to enclosures?
Really only when they're laying,
Moisture,
honestly.
Okay.
Yeah, or if we have, like they're in blue or something like that.
So you don't have shedding issues too much? Or?
No, okay, so it's more like retics always have shedding issues. So, and they're not issues. They don't have problems with it, but they never shed in one piece after a certain size.
Oh, really?
So
I always tell people
after about 2 feet, you're not getting them anymore. They're very thin-skinned, and it just kind of like flakes off everywhere.
Same thing with the green tree
normal.
python. Exact same thing, and it is. Their anatomy is different. The skin is thinner, and it's actually pretty common that they're not in one piece. It's exciting when they're in like maybe 2 pieces. And you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't always have to help him. I'll mist him, and he'll kind of get it off on his own in the middle of the night usually. But occasionally, I got to hotbox him and
the retics will typically get it off on their own. You can always give them a soak or something.
Yeah.
If you want it off.
Now I know you have some giants. You have some mainland retics. Is that where you started and then worked your way into dwarfs, or how did that?
So actually,
how did one thing lead to the other, or do I have it backwards?
No, I think so. I'm kind of like a '90s reptile kid, right? And then back then it was like, oh, I want something crazy. Should I get a Nile crocodile or a retic?
Something big,
equally insane.
I'm gonna terrify mom.
I always knew I wasn't gonna be capable of that, but. My second exotic snake, my very first one was a carpet python. It just happened to be at a local pet store, and it was very aggressive, and everyone was afraid of it. So I got that because I loved it. But the first one I went out and like intentionally got was actually a Jampea Island dwarf reticulated python. So that was my second exotic reptile pet, or I should say snake.
And is that kind of what triggered your direction you went with the dwarfs?
I think so. But I mean, it was the same thing for me that I think is applicable for a lot of people, where a super dwarf retic, if you saw a full-grown super dwarf retic in your backyard, you'd be like, holy crap, that was a huge snake.
Yes.
They're still big snakes relative to snakes.
Right.
Yes.
But if you can feed them nothing but rats and keep them in a off-the-shelf kind of PVC enclosure you can buy at any reptile show, it's a lot easier. The mainlands that I have are more for educational stuff. So we have a 21-foot, 200-pound female named Karma, and she's a puppy dog, and she's awesome for it's the kind of snake that would make you want to have a giant snake, personality wise, until you try to hold her, or you shovel her horse impressions when she takes a dump, or I say she eats a 30-pound pig. Everyone's like, where am I gonna get a 30-pound
4 or
pig?
5 people to carry her around.
It's crazy.
But
I keep her just to kind of show, like, don't buy that baby mainland retic if you're not ready for this.
You haven't seen some of the biggest bulls in this room, but when we're done here, we may have to show you a couple of those. Just see how they stack up to your dwarfs, because there's a couple here that are.
Do you have a gram scale?
Very, very, very big.
I don't.
Don't come on here, I don't think.
Because we had like a dozen females that laid under 1,500 grams last year.
Wow,
which is like minimum size for a ball python.
That's amazing
to breed at. So they're
small. So they're very, very, very doable snakes.
Sure.
Yeah.
They're long and lean like
Pituophis,
you know what I mean? So.
Okay, so the one thing that we are most excited to talk to you about is something that you have just recently dove into the deep end of the pool with.
Yeah, don't remind me. Don't talk to my wife.
Don't let your wife see this video. But
you know what I'm talking about. You've seen it.
So
you saw that too.
African house snakes. So Jason has kept them for a few years. He's had the blacks and he has the capes now, the T positive.
Do you like the capes better than the blacks?
Yeah, those blacks were a little flighty for
me.
me.
They look good, but
they're sharp.
Yeah.
I love that python looking head on them. But
the capes are where it's at.
You know those teeth on those little black guys?
Yeah.
It feels like electricity. They're so fine.
Yeah. And
Did you bite me?
They have almost like dog teeth, like sharp, long sharp ones that
they're like needles or something.
No, they get you.
Wow.
Now, how did you get in? Did you buy a collection from somebody? Did you actually import some animals? This is one of those species where, speaking of green tree pythons, they were on my bucket list forever, but for a long time they were imported. There were all kinds of potential issues. They were very expensive. So did you import any, or did you buy out some existing collections?
So, well, I'll just say I talk a lot with Warren Klein from OUT Reptiles, and if you're in the U.S. and you need house snakes, that's the place to go, in my opinion. Now, I have, at this point, gotten them from all over the place, but I don't know that I have any wild collected animals that aren't some kind of new morph.
Okay.
So I don't import any of that stuff. We didn't breed for any of that stuff. I started with the best selectively bred things. You watched me see your collection. I found a couple new things in here, like hypo gray bands that I didn't even know existed. I don't know if you caught my reaction to those.
We did.
I'm not too...
Same as mine.
Yeah. It's not too hard to sway me where I'm like, I don't want a gray band, and then I walk out with pockets full of gray bands.
If they weren't being held back, you'd probably already own those too.
I asked a couple of times, didn't I? So no, this is what happened. The reason I asked
the question is because you literally dove in the deep end. You didn't start with 2 pair. You have a sizable collection.
Yeah, so I kind of did start with, if I'm going to start, if you want to really see it, you can't use one animal. So basically, Warren was into some of the really high-end locality super dwarves that you can only get from us, and I was into some of the super cool projects that he had. And so he had been buying retics from me for a while, and there was one I really wanted to sell him, but he's like, that's a lot. And I was like, well, so I had always appreciated African house snakes. I'd seen them in pet shops, almost always as imports, but you would catch the occasional albino cape or something like that. I love their head shape. I loved their personalities. I love their size. I love their ruggedness. They're very they're on the other side of the equator, right? But they're almost like a North American colubrid in terms of hardiness. I like that. I don't like super sensitive, crazy, snakes or whatever.
They may be the funnest snake to watch eat.
They're so much personality. So much personality.
They're aggressive eaters.
Yeah, they're also if you get
they're
them,
fun.
I didn't notice that yours were too acclimated or whatever, but if you have one that you handle and stuff, they're ridiculously curious.
Yes.
They want to know everything all the time once they're not afraid of you. So the way I got into it, I ended up with about 10 pairs of probably the most expensive house snakes you could get, because in comparison to pythons, they're all way cheaper.
Right.
So I was like, here's a pair of pythons for your best 10.
Yeah,
and awesome. It wasn't even give me your best babies. I was like, I want that one and that, all the guys' personal breeders and holdbacks.
Wow. Okay.
And I kept the 10 of them, and I was like, yeah, I really like these. You know what I mean? And we just kind of I didn't say anything about it. I raised them for a few years. I bred them. I had a couple projects that I wanted to do, and then so after 2 generations, quick generations, I was like, yeah, these work exactly the way I want. So I think I went back, and then there was the video of my wife hating them where we're opening them in the back of the truck. And she's like, how many of these are there? Because she knew I was getting a couple more house snakes. She's like, why do you need more? 10 is already too many.
Yeah,
and there was like 20 bags, and then there was like 30 snakes per bag. so yeah, it's once
deep dive.
Yeah, I try to stay away from things that I know that I'll like because I'm absolutely addictive personality when it comes
with
to
the
that.
trade.
Yeah.
The hobby.
Oh, it's bad.
We love house snakes. We've done a video on them, and we both own them, and we think they should be the next big thing. I mean, there's been a trend in the hobby recently towards smaller snakes, hognose, gray-banded kings, snakes like that.
These are great for that. Sound like the Tanzanian stripes are very small.
These fit right in that same area. Their personalities are amazing. Their temperaments are great. They're great eaters. At least the capes are. I know there's some others that are a little more finicky. From your perspective, why house snakes? I mean, you've gone from retics and dwarf retics. Why house snakes?
No, you nailed it. The reason I breed dwarf and super dwarf retics is I was like, they're the snakes for someone who wants an interactive pet. If you want an interactive pet that is a snake, I like snakes because they're so easy compared to lizards or tortoises or something.
Agreed.
But a tortoise is going to be super interactive with you.
Yeah.
So or a monitor lizard, for example. I wanted that, but in a snake. If that's what you want, you get a super dwarf retic. That's why I did it. I was like, they're perfect for that. And they're very underappreciated, which I also like. The house snakes check all the boxes. They have all these cool morphs, which if you like a green snake, a purple snake, a black snake, a white snake, you can get it in those, and that gets you hooked. Then you learn, and usually I tend to go towards the cool locality stuff, which are typically a lot more subtly colored, but they're my favorite. So you can dive as deep into that as you want. There's different species, which allow for different things. There's different localities within species, morphs within the localities. They are the right size, as in, for me, the right size is like readily available food, readily available caging. So a house snake will eat a mouse its whole life. From a hatchling or from a newborn up to an adult, and that's what they eat. So easy there. They eat them great. They're very temperature hardy. They never get sick. So all of these things were great. It's just a matter of getting captive bred ones and enough of a variety, because I think what you typically see is more of, like, I call them fuglies. The Fuliginosus is a different species of African house snake that are easily imported because they're not from South Africa.
Okay.
They bring them over. They're patternless, brown, no morphs. They tend to get sick a lot just with wild-caught snake type issues.
Okay.
That's most people's experience. They see these cool captive-bred capes. They go buy one of these fugly ones, and they're like, oh, that's not all it's cracked up to be. I don't get it. Yeah. But if you actually have a cape, with some of the, especially like a high pattern line or something like that, it's an amazing experience.
Well, one thing that's neat is, like, you can have a cheap cape.
Oh, absolutely.
Up to some
less than
$100.
You can get a really cool cape house snake.
You can get anybody can afford these.
Yeah, even the albinos are like, I don't know, $150 for a T negative or something. They're super cheap. Yeah, and now that we've never really had selectively bred bloodlines, until now. Like, we're, I think, 6 generations in. It's a world of difference from anything you've seen, which is a big reason why a lot of people like our stuff, because they're like, whoa, like,
very cool.
What I think is neat is, like, because you're here in the States, and I was trying to, when I first started looking into these morphs, like 6 years ago, and it was just like, I'm going to have to import all these from Europe? Like,
yeah.
And now
I got them all.
Now you got them.
Well, really, Warren is
Warren.
Yeah. In South African, they say the fundi. He's like the expert. He's like the guy. So he's the fundi. He recognized it, brought all the stuff over, bred them here stateside, and I just bought all his best stuff. So he really established a lot of that. We've produced a lot of cool new combos and put our own spin on the selective breeding. But honestly, my side of it, he's more the expert when it comes to house snakes. Okay. I'm just more trying to bring the message of, like, oh my gosh, you guys, this is the perfect.
Yes.
I cannot think of a better first snake. And that's including all North American colubrids and everything else.
Well, it's neat because they rarely refuse food.
No, they're very easy to keep healthy.
Yeah,
they tolerate a wide range of temperatures. they're very hard to kill.
Yeah.
And they're smaller. So corn snakes are great too,
Yeah.
but they still get pretty big.
They can.
A house snake is considerably smaller than a corn snake.
Yeah, my female religiously will not eat when she sheds. But other than
that, they eat.
She
every time.
eats. And I think I was telling you earlier, she will coil, but she will coil up into a cone. It is so fun to watch.
They eat like MMA
They go
fighters.
rolling after, they'll coil the prey and then they'll go rolling around.
They'll tackle it across the cage.
They hit hard.
And then they're
so
super
fun.
friendly when you're holding them. It's weird.
But they're great temperaments. It's such an interesting dynamic, how aggressively they eat, but amazing temperaments.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
In the house snake world, I see it. I've noticed this on like Morph Market and some of the Facebook, social medias places, and like people are mixing like subspecies,
or even full species,
or
even genuses.
Countries. They're breeding Kenyans to Capes and. What's your opinion on hybrids? Is this a world where you just have to accept it, or can maybe we lead the charge to keep the house snakes clean?
Okay, you might not like my answer. I'm not a huge fan of hybrids. It's always a weird, cool curiosity to see something new. I'm personally not a fan of hybrids. I think what you have, the history of how it starts, is a little different. So with gray band kings and like aggressive locality, pure, sides of the hobby, it starts with collecting them off a certain highway, and you knew if you got it from the eastern or western side of that highway, you were there. With the African house snakes, it's a very understudied genus. It needs a lot of reform. What wasn't a hybrid before is now. As they continue splitting stuff, there's a lot of that.
There's still a lot of work.
They also call everything a house snake. Like in Pennsylvania, you find snakes by creeks, so they call everything a water snake. And you're like, well, no, that's a queen snake. No, that's a decays. No, that's a...
They lump in the file snakes. And
everything's a house snake. So there's multiple genuses and all this kind of stuff. Now, if you know what it is, like if you get into like the pure capes, for example, which I would always recommend Cape house snake, Boyd and Capensis, that's where you go. So a lot of cool localities. I mean, like, I don't have any issue breeding localities within capes whatsoever.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
No, because I think you have the ones from, like, kind of the red rock regions. If you put those into the albinos, you get them a little brighter. They're all still capes, though.
Yeah.
The ones I didn't like were things like butters is probably the most commonly represented. So that's a green, which already has changed its subspecies name. It was one of the fuglies, the Fuliginosus. Now it's... I forget. I gotta call Warren. I need my lifeline. But it still starts with an F. Furdi or something. So they've already changed again. But they bred those green house snakes into the albinos to get these cool lemony, whatever. Yeah. And they're pretty neat. But what I'll say is, as pretty as they are, they bring a lot of the challenges from the other species where they're not the best eaters. Okay. Low fertility rates actually is a huge problem with the hybrids. So even if you can get them to be done once, it's really hard to get a second generation.
Okay.
So I think that they're going to be, they have weird eggs. I have a bunch. So I have like black het hypos and black het blue eyes. I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about that. Those are new projects. But to try to make like a smoke gray or whatever, we have stuff like that. But when they lay, instead of normal eggs, they lay these eggs that are like the size of a pea. Oh, and you're like, what the heck? And they'll lay 50 of them and then they just all die. And you're like, what is that?
Wow.
What the heck?
So might be self-defeating anyway. If you truly want to breed and have fun, it's probably better to stick with them.
I'm glad that happens.
Self-regulated.
Yeah. Takes care of itself. But I think we're on the same page. The ones that bother me is I'm seeing on social media where they're actually taking snakes from an entirely different country in Africa and they're mating them to capes.
Yeah.
And you'll see like Kenyan cape.
Well, so you're really not going to find an imported cape.
That's where I think you get into a weird...
And if you're finding cheap house snakes online, there's no reason to buy an import. I would highly not recommend that. There's a lot of weird diseases and stuff that come, not just because they're like dirty snakes running around the wild, but it's the importation stuff. It's multi-species mixed in a box, brought over here. They're exposed to things they wouldn't be exposed to, and they're not used to it. Then you get it. So just buy a captive bred baby. They eat great. They're awesome. Yeah. The Cape house snakes, because South Africa is a little more challenging to export from, nobody really does it. So again, if you stick with capes, you're probably getting captive bred.
Yeah.
But if you're breeding other stuff into them, that's where the morphs, they're like house snake, brown house snake. That's the other thing. Everyone calls everything a brown house snake.
Yeah.
Like capes and the fuliginosus are both called brown house snakes, depending on who you ask. So just don't stay away from the imported stuff. Buy the captive breds, and you'll have a better experience.
There's no need to import them anymore. There's plenty in the country now.
Originally, I started by wanting to have all the house snakes too, like the auroras and the bug eyes and they in my collection. I was like, you know what? We're just talking about how they check all the boxes and they're all super cool. There's a lot of cool diversity within them, but a lot of these species just do not ever acclimate well to captivity.
Okay.
And the capes do. They're amazing at it. But if you have a snake, it's one thing we're talking about. Like gray bands can be a little tricky to eat because they're used to lizards in the wild or whatever. You get them switched over, though, and they're good. A lot of the house snake stuff, they're just like never good. They were going to be challenging forever.
Okay.
And so it might be great for, like, I would say some of these, you know, like, oh, I like this one, I like that one. If you're an advanced keeper and long-time keeper of house snakes, go for it. If you want a really challenging one that's not as good looking and fun as your cape, do it. You know?
Yeah.
But if you're getting into it, forget those ones. They're not
more trouble
popular
than
for
it's
a
worth.
reason. Yeah.
What about, I do this on occasion, and I just recently did it, but like, I collected a gopher snake.
Mm-hmm.
A wild caught, normal, nothing special. I like to strengthen bloodlines.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, do you feel like that's an issue in the house snake world? Or do you feel like there's enough diversity already in this country that you don't need to really... I mean, you can naturally outcross by just breeding different phenotypes and this.
It's
and that.
already happening for you. So what you have is a couple of different things. First of all, there's a lot of new morphs right now, and they're actually worth a decent amount of money. People over there are used to it, and our economy, what we would pay for a new morph, is different than it might be 5 years of their salary.
Yeah.
They're going to find that snake and bring it over.
That's
well, now, yes. And so we are getting imports anyway. And as soon as like, there are so few, let's say, double recessive projects.
It's not like this, but it's not like this John's Jungle goes and ravages the land and collects a bunch of everything. It's like they're selectively...
There's no reason to do that with them. They're too cheap on the normal end to do that.
So it's like they're out, the people in that those like South Africa, they're looking for, just like they would in the States.
They find house snakes every other day
yeah.
in their house.
They're
but
very,
like
very common.
So when they see an albino, they go,
know. Yeah.
this has to go to America. Or actually, what's happened now is their herpetoculture, they've kind of wised up. They're like, why let the American breeders be the founder of the morph? And so what you're seeing is...
them over there.
Well, I would say legitimately captive breeding them. They're breeding them. Yeah, well, I mean, it's fine, but they're breeding them in enclosures in their homes, making the hets, raising them up, doing new ones. So far, all the morphs in the Cape house snakes are recessive, with the exception of one I would consider, like as a python guy, I would consider like an incomplete dominant. I'm not trying to like put my stuff on house snakes at all. There's lots of experts out there that are doing it, but just as observation, there's some where you're like, there's a het and that one's not, and the het looks crazy on its own. Yeah. That's an incomplete dominant to me. So there's one morph called a marble that is like that, and they're pretty cool. But no, there's a lot of genetic diversity, and you could always go get it. Like that normal gopher snake is valuable to you because it's bringing genetic diversity. Yeah. You could go do that at any point. You just have to buy captive bred stuff from South Africa to bring it over. Yeah. But they can all be F1s.
So
it's pretty easy to do.
So that's pretty cool. They're on the up and up over there.
Yep.
They're looking for morphs.
Yep.
That could be a paycheck for them. Like, so it is valuable and something they want to do because, I mean, living's not as easy over there, I'd imagine.
Right. But, and this foundation for the hobby is one of the other things that you have to check. Is this something that's sustainable? You know, and it is. They're like a very common snake. They are the most common snake that people go catch and find out there all the time, besides maybe some venomous stuff, right?
Right.
And so they're just a great pet snake. And so
Yeah.
it's a great foundation for it. It does not hurt anything in the wild to cherry pick an albino every now and then from the most common thing running around,
Yeah.
or
Well,
get these cool localities.
Even in your brief captive experience, I mean, they've gone just in the last few years from a snake that was a little bit challenging to sell at expos and things like that, but now pretty easy.
Nobody had heard of them before, and the
Yeah.
word is out.
I have noticed how snakes are moving a little better.
People are noticing.
There's also a trend, especially like, okay, a lot of us reptile breeders utilize professional tools like racks, right? So there's a trend to have larger or more enriched enclosures and stuff like that. So if you have ball python racks and the ball python industry hasn't been treating you well, but you know how to breed morphs and you know how to market your snakes and you know how to sell a show, all of a sudden a house snake that can very viably live in this its entire life, and this would be like a castle for.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, it wouldn't work because they'd get out. You know what I mean? The ventilation.
But these other ones, these little...
But they would be a castle for
Yeah.
a house snake. You could have a fully planted bioactive enclosure going on in there.
Yeah.
With by the way, apparently you can keep them communally like garter snakes too, which adds another really fun element for a pet keeper.
That is neat.
You have to set the
That is
cage up for it,
interesting.
but they do really well in communal setups.
I could see that, I could see that even in the wild or
You
in
flip.
someone's yard. They have a board that these
Yeah.
snakes. It's just
There's 10
perfect.
of them.
That's
for
the
'em.
spot with the moisture, and
There's
they're
10
all
of them.
there.
There are 10
That's
of them
exactly
under
what
there,
it
yeah.
is. That's
We
exactly what it is.
we actually did a video where we talked about cohabbing. What happened to it? I mean, you can definitely do it safely with a lot of species, but it's kind of fallen out of favor.
I've tried it with some gopher
Yeah.
snakes.
Typically, you need a rinse and repeat process when
Yeah.
you get to a certain size so that you can keep a
Yeah.
good eye on everything. But I would love to have like one enclosure full of garter snakes.
Oh
or
yeah,
house snakes.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah.
I have talked about combining some of my pits enclosures with like hamster tubing, and just see
old school like
you
Bob
know,
Applegate.
Yeah,
style,
you know,
like
do
multi-layer enclosures
they
and- Heck
interact and
Yep.
explore, or my wife is betting they'll all just hang out in the hamster tubing and
One thing
they'll
about
prefer it.
Yeah.
one thing I just thought of is cohabbing house snakes. Like when I breed mine, I put him in there for a day.
Yeah.
Because I only let him. He goes in there maybe twice a year at best. Like
And then she lays 5 clutches.
yeah,
eggs.
she'll lay
Yeah.
3 clutches of
Yeah.
fertile
You
eggs.
can't stop them.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
But it's like,
Lots of
but
double
I'm-
and triple clutching.
would you, if you were cohabbing, would you worry about these males overbreeding themselves or
No.
no?
No.
Okay.
So we have large scale. We have a lot of house snakes now. It's kind of ridiculous, but certain times, like if we get that crazy double recessive male, that's the first time ever. I might breed him to 12 females in a season. So he's in one day, next day, next
Rotating,
day, next
just
day,
rotating.
next day,
Yeah,
next day.
rotating.
So he is always in with females,
Okay.
and they're different females. So he's actively breeding them.
So can the females overbreed? Do you feel like?
I don't know how to stop them. Yeah. So like the hard thing with females. So here's, if you want to get technical
Is
on
it
it,
going to shorten their lives?
you almost
or-
have to stop them from breeding.
Yeah.
I kind of do.
But it has nothing to do with pairing. It's more feeding.
Okay.
Yeah.
I kind of try not to let my females go 6 clutches a year. I just want them to lay a couple because I was worried about that.
Yeah. So the only way I've found to do that, though, like with a lot of species, you just don't introduce the male
That's
again.
exactly.
This doesn't work with house snakes. I've had house
Okay.
snakes literally produce clutches that have not been paired that year. They had not been paired for over
Every
12
10.
months.
Gosh.
Wow.
And they're all fertile
Every-
clutches, and they're from that male. It's not parthenogenesis or anything
She's
else.
held on to that
Wow.
sperm for a
So
year.
that's not the problem, having the male in there. What you have to do is, like, after they lay, they look terrible.
Yeah.
They have huge clutches. They're
Yeah.
super scrawny. And I'm like, oh my gosh, poor baby. Here's some extra food. And then they make another clutch.
And then they make
Yeah.
another.
And they
clutch.
make another clutch.
Yeah. If
So you have
you-
to stop that. It's very different. So
So-
you have to just
If you want them to slow down, just
let them
slow
lay.
down on the
They're
feed.
scrawny. Don't feed them.
Don't go
Starve
crazy on
them
the
for
feed.
a minute.
Yeah.
And they'll be
Yeah.
like, wow, this is a hard season. I probably shouldn't lay. The second you fatten them back up, they're dumping
Boom.
another clutch, even if it's a year later.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we are excited to meet someone now who's just excited about house snakes as we are. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah, you guys have
we've
to
only
talk to
dipped
the
our
friendly at some
toes.
We're
point.
just dabbling.
We've just dipped our toes. You're already in the deep end,
It's-
so we
you
are
just-
definitely going to be reaching out about how to expand our collection. But
Just be careful. That's all I was
no,
going to
no,
say.
no.
They're
Without a
so
doubt.
addictive.
Without a
There's
doubt.
so much cool stuff.
Well, Garrett, we appreciate this. It's great to
Yeah.
meet you. We followed you online, and so we appreciate it. Anything you want to tell our audience that we didn't ask you about Reach Out Reptiles?
No, we'll have a parallel
Anything you wanna
episode, so
plug?
you'll just come check
Okay.
it out on Reach Out Reptiles on YouTube, and you'll see me checking out his snakes, which I'm sure is a lot more interesting to you guys as viewers.
Fantastic.
Got some cool projects going on. Thank you for showing me all
Thank
that
you.
stuff, by the way.
We appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you
was
for
awesome.
coming by. Thanks for making time while you're in town.
100%.
Thanks,
It's
Garrett.
been a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, it was awesome. Learning stuff about